Moving into apartment 707 with Amanda felt like the beginning of a thrilling new chapter. We had been searching for months, and when we found that apartment in the heart of the city, it seemed perfect, charmingly old, with just the right amount of vintage flair, and affordable for two young women eager to make their mark in the world. From the moment we stepped inside, I felt an inexplicable chill, a small prickle at the back of my neck, but I brushed it off as excitement. This was our chance to build a life here, in a place filled with history and character. The first few days were filled with the hustle of moving in. Boxes were stacked in every corner, waiting to be unpacked, and the living room was an obstacle course of scattered belongings. The building itself was ancient, with creaky wooden floors and dimly lit hallways that carried echoes of past residents. Yet, it had a charm I couldn't deny. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off. It was Amanda who first pointed out the strange crack in the living room wall. It wasn't just any crack. It seemed to pulse subtly, as if it were alive. We laughed it off, chalking it up to old building issues, and resolved to call the landlord about it later. Our neighbor, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Henderson, greeted us on our second day there. Her demeanor was odd, her eyes holding an intensity that unnerved me. She leaned in closer than necessary, as if sharing a secret, and muttered something about the history of our apartment. She warned us in hushed tones to be careful, but when I pressed her for details, she clammed up and hurried away, leaving an unsettling feeling in her wake. That night was when the whispers started. I awoke to the sound of soft voices drifting through the apartment, as if carried by an unseen breeze. My initial thought was that they were coming from the apartment next door, but they felt too close, too intimate. I strained to listen, trying to catch a coherent word or phrase, but they dissolved into nothingness as I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Amanda stirred beside me, and I shook her awake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the thudding of my heart. She mumbled something incoherent and rolled over, dismissing my concerns with a sleepy wave of her hand. I lay back down, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But the unease lingered, growing more pronounced with each passing night. I found myself waking at the same time, the whispers becoming more insistent, more demanding. The feeling of being watched, even during the daylight hours, became almost unbearable. I started noticing small things. Items would disappear and reappear in strange places, things that couldn't be attributed to our chaotic unpacking. My favorite mug, for instance, would be missing from the kitchen cupboard, only to turn up later on the bathroom sink. Amanda, ever the pragmatist, brushed off my concerns as stress-induced paranoia. "We're just tired from all the moving, Julia. You know how your mind can play tricks on you," she said, her tone light and dismissive. But I could see it in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, a shadow of fear she couldn't quite conceal. The tension between us began to simmer, a silent wedge driven by things we couldn't fully articulate. As the days turned into a week, the feeling of being watched intensified. I'd catch glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye, shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the edges of my vision. I avoided the living room at night, the crack in the wall seeming to widen, its pulsating rhythm matching the whispered voices. One evening, as I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the voices returned, louder and more urgent. This time, I heard a distinct word, a name. It sent a chill down my spine, freezing me in place. "Amanda," it whispered. So clear it was as if someone had spoken directly into my ear. My heart seized in my chest, and I leapt from my chair, rushing to find Amanda, needing to confirm she was safe. I found her in the bedroom, seemingly unfazed, lost in a book. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked up, puzzled. "Hear what?" she replied, her expression unchanged. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Never mind," I muttered, backing out of the room, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The days continued to pass, each one marked by an increasing sense of dread. I found myself wandering the city, desperate for a reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere of the apartment. It was during one of these walks that I stumbled across the local library, its aged facade promising answers to the questions swirling in my mind. I hesitated for a moment, standing on the steps, before pushing the door open and stepping inside, the musty scent of old books wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. Little did I know, the answers I sought would be more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. The library was an old stone building that loomed over the street with a weighty silence, much like our apartment, and I entered with a sense of urgency tinged with dread. The librarian, a kindly old woman with round glasses perched on the tip of her nose, gave me a polite nod as I made my way to the archives section. I knew what I was looking for, though I wasn't quite sure why. The whispers, the crack, Amanda's changing demeanor. All of it demanded answers, and I was determined to find them. I spent hours sifting through old newspapers and public records, hoping to uncover the history of our building, and specifically apartment 707. It was deep in the dusty volumes that I found the first piece of the puzzle. An article from decades ago detailed a series of mysterious deaths that had occurred in our apartment. The tenants had all lived there at different times, but shared a common fate: madness followed by disappearance. The words leapt out at me from the yellowed paper, chilling me to the bone. One story in particular stood out. A young couple, John and Margaret Sinclair, had moved into 707 in the 1960s. According to the article, they were the picture of happiness until something changed. Neighbors reported hearing arguments, screams, and strange noises. Margaret was said to have become obsessed with the idea that the apartment was haunted. Her husband vanished one night, leaving her alone, desperate and slowly descending into madness. She was last seen staring at the wall, muttering about a child. The library's records showed that the building had once been owned by a wealthy family who had suffered a tragedy. Their only child, a boy named Thomas, had died in a horrific accident. The family had been shunned, the details of their fall from grace obscured by time and whispered rumors. I could feel the pieces falling into place, a grim mosaic of despair and vengeance, and I began to wonder if the child's spirit was trapped in our apartment, angry and unable to move on. I returned to the apartment with a heavy heart, my mind reeling with this newfound knowledge. As I climbed the stairs, each step felt like a march towards some inevitable doom. I opened the door to find Amanda sitting in the living room, her eyes fixed on the pulsating crack in the wall. There was something in her gaze, an intensity that was both foreign and frightening. "Amanda?" I called softly, trying not to startle her. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine with an unsettling calm. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice unnaturally even, "about what you said, about the noises. Maybe there's something to it after all." I hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. The change in her demeanor was alarming, a stark contrast to her usual dismissive attitude towards anything supernatural. "I did some research," I confessed, sitting beside her. "There's a history here, a really dark one." She listened as I recounted what I'd learned, her expression shifting from disbelief to intrigue, and then to something that looked almost like recognition. "That's not all, Julia," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been seeing things." Her confession sent a shiver through me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my pulse quickening. At first, it was just shadows. But then, there was a boy. I thought I was dreaming, but he seemed so real. "He's always near the crack, just staring at me," she admitted, her voice trembling. It was a revelation that both frightened and relieved me. Frightened because it confirmed my worst fears, that the spirit was indeed real and malicious, but relieved because I was no longer alone in my torment. "We need to get help," I said urgently, my mind racing for solutions. Amanda nodded, her bravado crumbling to reveal the fear beneath. "I don't want to end up like those people you read about. I don't want to disappear." With a newfound resolve, we decided to reach out to a paranormal investigator I'd heard about, someone who specialized in hauntings and had a reputation for uncovering the truth. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The atmosphere in the apartment was stifling, a tangible tension that seeped into every corner, every shadow. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before, their voices a cacophony that filled the room. This time, I listened carefully, trying to discern the message hidden within their ghostly chorus. "Find him," they seemed to say over and over, like a commandment from some otherworldly force. I woke Amanda, desperate to share my revelation. "They want us to find him, Amanda. I think they want us to find Thomas." She sat up, eyes wide and fearful, the weight of our situation finally sinking in. "But how do we find a ghost?" she asked, her voice quivering. It was a question that lingered in the air, unanswered, as we lay back down, the darkness pressing in on us like a suffocating shroud. The next morning, Amanda and I felt a sense of urgency as we reached out to the paranormal investigator. His name was Dr. Michael Weaver, and he came highly recommended. His voice was calm and assured over the phone, a stark contrast to the anxiety that gnawed at us. He agreed to come by that afternoon, promising to do everything he could to uncover the truth about apartment 707. As I hung up the phone, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe we could find some answers and put an end to the terror that had consumed our lives. Dr. Weaver arrived just as the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch ominously down the hallway. He was an unassuming man, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. As he stepped into our apartment, he paused, taking in the atmosphere with a discerning gaze. "There's definitely something here," he said, his voice thoughtful. "You can feel it, can't you?" We nodded, relief washing over us at his acknowledgement of the unseen force that had made our home its domain. Dr. Weaver wasted no time in setting up his equipment: EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and a digital recorder to capture any potential EVPs. Amanda and I watched nervously as he moved methodically around the apartment, pausing occasionally to jot down notes or adjust his instruments. He finally stopped in front of the crack in the living room wall, staring at it with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "This is where it's strongest," he murmured, almost to himself. "The energy here is different." "What does that mean?" Amanda asked, her voice barely concealing the edge of panic. Dr. Weaver turned to us, his expression serious. "It means that whatever is here is trying to communicate. That crack is more than just a structural flaw. It's a focal point, a gateway of sorts for the spirit's energy." His words sent a chill through me, confirming my deepest fears. The crack wasn't just a physical blemish on our wall. It was the source of all the strange occurrences. As if sensing our apprehension, Dr. Weaver offered a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, we'll figure this out, but I'll need to perform a seance to try and communicate directly with the spirit." The thought of actively engaging with the entity that haunted our home was terrifying, but Amanda and I knew it was the only way to get answers. As we prepared for the seance, the apartment felt more oppressive than ever. The air was thick, almost electric, and the whispers had returned, their ghostly cadence rising and falling like a spectral tide. We gathered in the living room, the furniture pushed back to make space for a small table that Dr. Weaver had set up in the center of the room. He instructed us to sit, lighting a few candles that cast flickering shadows across the walls. "Whatever happens, stay calm," he advised, his voice steady. "We're only here to listen and understand." The seance began with a moment of silence, the room hushed and expectant. Dr. Weaver closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind to the spirit that had tormented us for so long. The tension was palpable, each of us holding our breath as we waited for something, anything, to happen. Then, suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin. Amanda gasped, her hand clutching mine tightly as the candles flickered violently. "Who are you?" Dr. Weaver asked, his voice firm but respectful. "Why are you here?" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a soft, childlike voice filled the room, carried on the whispering winds that seemed to swirl around us. "Thomas," it said, the word hanging in the air like an echo. My heart raced as I realized that we were indeed speaking with the spirit of the boy who had died so tragically. "Thomas, what happened to you?" Dr. Weaver pressed gently, his eyes still closed as he concentrated. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the answer that had eluded us for so long. The voice came again, tinged with sadness and anger. "Betrayed," it whispered, followed by a chilling wail that sent shivers down my spine. The candles flickered more intensely, and the crack in the wall seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Images flooded my mind, glimpses of a past that was not my own. I saw flashes of a boy's life, filled with happiness and warmth, abruptly shattered by a terrible accident. I saw his family, once revered, reduced to pariahs, their shame staining the very walls that now confined his spirit. The images were overwhelming, a torrent of emotions and memories that threatened to drown me. "Thomas, how can we help you?" Amanda asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and compassion. For a moment, there was silence, and then the voice returned, stronger this time. "Find him," it urged, the words filled with an urgency that set my heart pounding. "Find him and tell the truth." I exchanged a glance with Amanda, the same realization dawning on both of us. The spirit wanted closure, a resolution to the injustice that had trapped it in this cycle of vengeance. It was not enough to simply acknowledge the past. We had to find the one responsible for Thomas's fate and uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. As the seance came to an end, the atmosphere in the room shifted, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. Dr. Weaver opened his eyes, looking at us with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "We need to find out what happened to Thomas's family. There's more to this story than we know, and I suspect the answer lies in the records we haven't yet uncovered." His words were both daunting and reassuring, a reminder that our battle was far from over. As we extinguished the candles and prepared to delve deeper into the mystery of apartment 707, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing against time, the whispers of the past urging us forward toward a truth that was as terrifying as it was necessary. With the spirit's message echoing in our minds, Amanda and I felt a newfound sense of urgency. We needed to find the truth behind Thomas's death and the betrayal that bound his spirit to our apartment. Dr. Weaver, determined to help us, suggested we visit the city archives. He believed that hidden within those records was the key to unlocking the secrets that held the spirit captive. The following morning, Amanda and I headed to the city archives, our minds heavy with the burden of what we had to do. The building was an imposing structure of stone and glass, filled with the whispers of history. As we walked through the tall, echoing halls, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the ghosts of the past were observing our every move. We began our search in the dusty stacks of old newspapers and records, looking for anything related to the family that had once owned our building. Hours passed as we combed through documents, our eyes scanning page after page of faded text. Finally, buried deep within the archives, we found what we were looking for, a record of a tragic accident that had claimed the life of a young boy named Thomas. According to the report, Thomas had died in a fall down the grand staircase of his family's home, which was now our apartment building. The circumstances were suspicious, with whispers of foul play and betrayal lurking beneath the surface. The accident had occurred on the same day his father was accused of embezzlement, a scandal that destroyed their family's reputation and left them destitute. But what caught our attention was a small note in the margins of one document, written by the investigating officer. It mentioned a man named Edward Langley, a business associate of Thomas's father, who had been present on the day of the accident. There were rumors that Langley had orchestrated the scandal to take control of the family's assets, and that he might have been involved in Thomas's death. The pieces were beginning to fit together, a dark mosaic of greed and betrayal that had left Thomas's spirit trapped in a cycle of vengeance. Armed with this knowledge, we returned to Dr. Weaver, our resolve stronger than ever. We explained what we had discovered, our voices filled with both fear and determination. Dr. Weaver listened intently, nodding as we laid out our findings. "This Langley might be the key," he mused, his eyes alight with understanding. "If Thomas's father was betrayed, it would explain the spirit's anger and its need for justice. We must confront this, uncover the truth, and finally put Thomas's spirit to rest." But confronting the past was not a simple task. We needed more information, more proof of Langley's treachery, and the means to bring it to light. Dr. Weaver suggested we try to contact any surviving members of Thomas's family or anyone connected to them who might shed light on the events of that fateful day. After several phone calls and a lot of persistence, we managed to track down a distant relative of the family, a woman named Eleanor, who had once lived in the house before it was converted into apartments. She agreed to meet with us, intrigued by our story and the prospect of uncovering long-buried family secrets. We met Eleanor at a small cafe in the city, a cozy place filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. She was an elderly woman with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through the layers of time and lies. As we recounted our experiences and what we had learned, she listened carefully, nodding at intervals, her expression thoughtful. "I remember hearing about Edward Langley," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with the weight of memory. "He was a snake, always lurking in the shadows, looking for an opportunity to strike. My grandmother used to say that he would have done anything to get what he wanted, including turning on his own friends." Her words were like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, confirming what we had suspected all along. Langley had betrayed Thomas's father, and in doing so, had set in motion the events that led to Thomas's tragic death. But there was more. A diary that Eleanor's grandmother had kept, documenting the family's last days in their home. Eleanor agreed to share the diary with us, and as we pored over its pages, a clearer picture began to emerge. The entries painted a picture of a family beset by fear and betrayal, struggling to hold onto their legacy as the walls closed in around them. The final entries were especially poignant, written in a shaky hand that conveyed both desperation and resolve. On the day of Thomas's death, his father had confronted Langley, accusing him of orchestrating the scandal. But before anything could be resolved, tragedy struck, and Thomas was killed in a fall that was anything but accidental. The diary suggested that Langley had been there, watching, ensuring that his plan unfolded without a hitch. With this newfound knowledge, we knew what we had to do. We had to find a way to bring the truth to light, to expose Langley's treachery and allow Thomas's spirit to finally find peace. But how could we confront a man who had been dead for decades? Dr. Weaver had a plan. He suggested that we perform a ritual of cleansing, one that would not only banish the spirit but also acknowledge its pain and seek to right the wrongs of the past. It was a risky move, one that required a deep connection to the spirit and an understanding of its needs. But we were ready to try anything to rid our home of its curse. That evening, as darkness fell over the city, we prepared for the ritual. The apartment was eerily quiet, the whispers having faded to a mere murmur, as if waiting for the resolution we were about to bring. We gathered in the living room, the air heavy with anticipation and fear. Dr. Weaver led us through the steps, his voice steady and calm as he chanted the words that would, hopefully, bring peace to the tormented soul of young Thomas. Amanda and I joined in, our voices a harmonious blend of hope and desperation. As we spoke, the room seemed to shift, the air crackling with energy. The candles flickered wildly, casting long shadows across the walls that seemed to dance in time with the rhythm of our voices. And then, as if responding to our plea, the whispers rose again, a chorus of voices that filled the room with their haunting melody. "Thank you," the voice of Thomas echoed, a soft, plaintive sound that brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for remembering." In that moment, the crack in the wall pulsed one last time, and then, slowly, it began to seal itself, the edges knitting together as if by some unseen hand. The air grew still, the oppressive weight that had lingered for so long lifting, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. The ritual complete, we sat in silence, the reality of what we had accomplished settling in. Thomas's spirit had found peace, and with it, the curse of apartment 707 had been lifted. The danger had passed, the shadows receding as the truth was finally revealed. But as we sat there, in the quiet aftermath of the ritual, I couldn't help but wonder if the true danger lay not in the spirits that haunted us, but in the secrets buried in the past, the betrayals and lies that can twist and corrupt, lingering long after those involved have faded away.